One of the greatest movies ever made. You could argue with me, but you're going to lose the argument, is Avengers Endgame. There we go. There's some believers in this room. At the heart of the story is a mission to undo the devastation that was caused by Thanos, the villain who wiped out half of humanity, of the universe, in a snap of his fingers, right? The Avengers face what seems to be an impossible challenge. How do you reverse something so catastrophic? Now, if you are a big superhero fan, you'd expect the solution to be through sheer strength. Bigger battles, more power, someone swooping in to save the day. But the movie doesn't follow the usual script. Instead, the Avengers' victory comes through an upside-down, counterintuitive plan. There's Thor, for example. Once celebrated as the strongest Avenger, he's now broken. He's doubting himself. He's living in failure. His redemption doesn't come by proving his strength, but by accepting his identity even in his weakness. There's Doctor Strange, who foresees millions of possible futures, and out of all of them, there's only one path to victory, and it involves sacrifice. And finally, there's good old Tony Stark, Iron Man himself, a genius billionaire playboy who spent most of his life relying on his intellect and his arrogance. And in the movie's climax, Tony doesn't overpower Thanos. Instead, he lays down his life. And in the final act, he snaps his finger, sacrificing himself to save the universe. Strength is shown in weakness. Victory comes through surrender. What looked like defeat actually becomes the ultimate triumph. It's a stunning reversal. The heroes win, but not in the way anyone expected. Their victory isn't about domination or strength. It's about flipping the script on what it means to be a hero. And that's what Jesus does in his kingdom. Jesus brings a revolution of reversals. He's taken the controls of the world and is making everything now work backwards. In the kingdom of Jesus, what's high is low, and what's low is high. What's out is in, and what's in is out. And what's up is down, and what's down is up. It's a kingdom that is completely upside down. It's a revolution of reversals. And nowhere is this more dramatically seen and displayed than in the Beatitudes, the 9 famous blessings of Jesus in the Sermon on the Mount. Jesus stands before a crowd of broken, powerless people, sick, poor, the outcasts, and he blesses them. Instead of blessing the successful and the strong, he blesses the weak, the poor, the humble. It's a radical redefinition of what the good life is. And this morning, we're going to begin by looking at what the Beatitudes are as a whole, and then we'll dive into the first one, what it means to be poor in spirit. First of all, what are the Beatitudes? The most popular class ever taken at Yale University was Psych 157. Psych 157. It was called Psychology of the Good Life. In its first year, a few years ago, 300 students signed up immediately on the first day of registration. And within 3 days, that number had doubled. And within 3 more days, 1,200 students, a quarter of the entire student body, was registered for this class. And this wasn't just a one-time thing. It's still the most popular class at Yale today. Why? Because it's built on the perennial human question, what makes for the good life? What makes for the good life? And here's the thing, it's not just a modern-day question. It's an ancient one. If you ever read Aristotle, you know his entire philosophical system was centered on a concept that was built around the good life, the flourishing life. What does it mean to live well? What does it mean to be truly happy? That's the question that Aristotle was chasing. These are the questions that the contemporaries of Jesus were asking and answering for their followers. And I would argue that Jesus was operating in the same wisdom tradition at the time as many of these religious wisdom teachers. And that in some ways, what Jesus was doing in the Beatitudes and in the Sermon on the Mount is that he's offering his own alternative answer to the question of what is it that makes the good life? What is the good life? And he starts each of these Beatitudes in our English Bibles with the word blessed. You know, that word shows up in Matthew 5, 9 times. Blessed are the poor in spirit. Blessed are those who mourn. Blessed are, blessed are. Now, let me be honest. It is a terrible English word, right? Blessed is not a good English word. It's become a hashtag. You drink a pina colada on the beach in Cancun, hashtag blessed, right, Korean? All the lights turn green as you're driving home and you're not stuck in traffic, hashtag blessed. The vending machine gives you 2 bags of chips instead of 1 and you only paid for 1, hashtag doubly blessed and highly favored, right? The barista gives you a coffee in a large cup and you only paid for a small cup, hashtag blessed, hashtag my cup overflows, hashtag highly flavored, hashtag highly caffeinated. It is a weak word. It's overused. It doesn't mean anything. You're a Cowboys fan, hashtag good luck to you. You're an Eagles fan, hashtag pray for us today, right? No one knows what that word means. It doesn't have any power anymore. And yet the Greek word that's translated into blessed in our English Bibles is the word makarios. But here's the thing. Jesus didn't speak Greek. That's the language that the New Testament was written in, but Jesus didn't speak Greek. Jesus actually spoke Hebrew and Aramaic. So we can't actually be sure the word that Jesus used when he was teaching the Beatitudes and when he was saying these words, blessed are, blessed are, blessed are. But most scholars would agree, and a very reasonable guess, that the word that Jesus most likely used was the Hebrew word ashrei. Ashrei. I want you to pay attention to that word because we're going to come back to that in a second. But this word is all over the Old Testament. Psalms 1:1 begins like this: blessed is the man, ashrei is the man, who does not walk in the counsel of the wicked or stand in the way of sinners. The word ashrei is used over 30 times in the Bible, almost that many times in the book of Proverbs. And it's a way of describing the one who is happy, the one who is blessed, the one who is fortunate. It's a word that you might use to describe someone that you think has a really sweet gig, someone who has a really fortunate life, something about them that you admire, something about them that you want. I don't know about you, but when I watch someone win the lottery, like they scratch off a ticket or pick some random numbers and suddenly their whole life changes. I'm not talking about a little win where you get another free chance for $10. I mean the big ones where they're now holding this gigantic check of millions of dollars, right? And they're smiling year to year, and the reporter asks them, what are you going to do with all that money? And they're like, oh, I'll probably take care of my family, and I'll give some to charity, and I'll pay off my debt. And meanwhile, they're already planning on buying a private island with a slide that goes from the second floor straight into the ocean, right? They're dreaming big things. Heard of a guy who brought a $400 million, won $400 million, and the first thing he did was buy a custom Lamborghini. Not just any Lamborghini, it has gold trims, doors that opened up like wings, and an interior that looked so fancy that even spilling water or bringing water into it was like a crime. And I thought to myself, ashrei is the one who drives that Lamborghini. Ashrei is the one who never has to check their bank account before they fill up their gas tank. Ashrei is the one who never has to worry about where the next paycheck is going to come from. Or maybe it's the stories of those who won the lottery and who quit their jobs in the most dramatic ways possible. People who just stand up and tell their boss, hey, I'm done, I'm out, and walk out like Beyonce leaving a concert stage, right? And I'm like, ashrei is the one who gets to do whatever they want with their life. And now you hear the cautionary tales about people who blow all of their earnings, and you're like, they buy 2 houses, and they get into like, they buy 10 cars, and eventually they end up broke again. And let's be real, in a moment, we're not thinking about their mistakes. We're just imagining winning the lottery ourselves, and we're like, well, I'm going to be smarter than them. Ashrei is the one who at least gets the chance to find out what they could do with $1 million. And here's the thing. It's so easy to look at that kind of life and think, that's it. That's the good life. Ashrei is the one with the $1 million. Ashrei is the one with the no stress of bills. Ashrei is the one that's full, has a fridge full of fancy cheeses. Ashrei is the one whose things and appliances never break down. Ashrei. Ashrei. Every one of us in this room have our own versions of Ashrei, our own ideas of what it means to live the good life. For some of you, it's the dream house. For others, it's the perfect family, the best career, or even just getting 8 uninterrupted hours of sleep at night as you raise a newborn. Ashrei is the one who has obedient children who never talk back, or babies that sleep through the night starting at day 1. Ashrei. Ashrei is the one who gets to do exotic vacations that they can post all over their Instagram page. We all have a picture in our heads of who the fortunate ones are. And we're convinced that if we could just get there, we'd finally be living the life that we wanted. Like, what is it for you? Do this with me for a second. I want you to do this exercise with me. What's the first thing that comes to your mind when you say, Ashrei? And I don't want you to WWJD this. Don't over-spiritualize this. What is the thing in your mind? Who is the one? Who is the fortunate one? Turn to the person next to you. Just take 30 seconds. Tell the person next to you, who's Ashrei in your mind? Some of you seem like you have a long, long list. I mean, you have your own 9 Beatitudes. So come back. So I'm sure there's some interesting conversations there. But I want you to see what you just did is you wrote your own Beatitudes there. You wrote your own version of your Beatitudes. Blessed is the one with whatever you filled it. That's a Beatitude. That's what Jesus is getting at. In Jesus' time, people had a lot of ideas of who was Ashrei. They had their own list of Beatitudes. For example, in the Apocrypha, there is a book called Ben Sira, written around Jesus' time. And in chapter 25, Ben Sira offers his own list of Beatitudes. He says, Ashrei is the man who can rejoice in his children. Sounds good, right? Ashrei is the man who could see the downfall of his enemies. Ashrei is the man who lives with a reasonable wife. Ashrei is the man who has to never serve an inferior. And the list continues. There were his 9 Beatitudes. And there were a lot of lists like this in the ancient world, lists of who people thought were the blessed ones. And they were meant to be instructions about the kind of life that you should aspire to live. You want to live a good life? You want to be happy? Aspire to live like this. And here comes Jesus into this context. Hopefully this is helping you see the context and the culture into which Jesus is speaking to back then, and the culture and the context into Jesus is speaking to today. And Jesus gets up to teach. And here's this wandering rabbi. And if you go back to Luke 23 and 25, Matthew tells us that the crowds began to gather around him. And in this case, they were not the rich and the fortunate. They were not the successful and the powerful and the religious. They were the sick. They were the poor. They were the possessed. They were the powerless. They were the tax collectors. They were the sex workers, the losers, the lost, and the least. And these people gathered around Jesus, and Jesus begins to teach them. And he begins his teaching by saying, here's what it means to be Ashrei. Here's what it means. And he completely flips everything on its head. He challenges and critiques the prevailing wisdom of their day and the social conventions of the day. And he noticed what he says to them. We'll look at the text again. I want to read it to you from a different version. It's not in your Bibles, but watch this on the screen with me. News about Jesus spread all over Syria, and people flocked to him. Those who were wealthy and successful, with high-paying jobs, impressive resumes, perfect hair, and gym-toned bodies. And when Jesus saw the crowds, he went up to a mountainside, and he sat down, and his disciples gathered around him. And he said, "Blessed are the beautiful, for their lives will be full of joy. Blessed are the educated, for they will land the best jobs. Blessed are the rich, for their bank accounts will never run dry. Blessed are the clever, for they'll figure their way out of anything. Blessed are you when everyone likes you, praises you, and talks about how amazing you are. Rejoice and be glad, because that's exactly how they treated the great ones before you." Is that what Jesus says? Not at all. But do you see what I did there? I mentioned all the people that we would consider to be, in our cultural context, the most ashrei. All the people that you and I think are the most fortunate ones, the ones that we think are the most blessed ones. And what Jesus does is that he exposes how deeply we all carry around, whether we recognize it or not, an implicit understanding of who is living the good life. This vision is forged in us when we were young. It's fortified through media and marketing and social media platforms. It's reinforced daily through competitions and reward. And when you read the Beatitudes, it's not an exaggeration to say that Jesus' version of a blessed life comes in complete contradiction, total conflict with not just the world's vision of a good life, but if we're honest, it comes in complete conflict and total contradiction with what you and I believe a good life is. And with these Beatitudes, Jesus is puncturing our deceived notions of what makes for a good and flourishing life. And he is inviting us, friends, to trust that his vision of the good life is way better than any vision the world has to offer us. And this is what it means to be a disciple of Jesus. Not just to trust him for the minimal entry requirements to get into heaven. That's not being a disciple. To be a disciple means to trust Jesus, that he knows what the good life is, and he knows what true blessings are. More than your favorite influencer, more than Mr. Beast, more than any other influencer, more than Nike or Charles Schwab or your dream home construction guy or the neighbor next door or the people at the club or your bosses in their corner offices. To be a disciple of Jesus, a follower of Jesus, is to believe that he knows what is good for us. And as a result, you begin to completely rearrange your scorecard of success and significance in your life in this world. I want you to hear this loud and clear. Jesus is not saying these things to spoil your life or ruin your life, but he's actually saying these things to save your life. Because the worst thing that could happen, to paraphrase Thomas Merton, is that you could spend your life climbing the ladder that you think will lead to happiness, and at the end of your life, you realize that the ladder you've been climbing was leaning against the wrong wall. And that's what Jesus wants to save us from. And it's a deep challenge. But it's also a tremendous comfort, because I want you to hear this, because I know there's some of you in this room that would say that you're not living the life that you want. That you would never say that you're living the good life. That you would say that the story you're living right now is never the story you wanted, and that your hopes for a good life are gone. And I want to invite you to hear, I want you to hear that Jesus is inviting you to flip that perspective on its head, and he's saying to you, that in your stress and in your sorrow and in your brokenness and in your despair, in the place that you never thought you would be or should be, he is saying to you, the good life, the flourishing life, ashrei, you are ashrei. You are closer to the good life than you could ever think would be available to you. And so what are the Beatitudes? They are the invitation of Jesus to us for the good life. A life that flourishes not on self-sufficiency or success, but through dependence on Jesus. They are the heart of the upside-down kingdom. They are what Jesus invites us into so that we don't climb the wrong ladder that's facing the wrong wall. Let's jump into the first beatitude. Matthew 5 says these words, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven." Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. What does that mean? Let's break it down. The first word, poor. You lack resources. It means you have no resources. And then there's spirit. Spirit is your life, your breath, your inner vitality, energy, or fuel for life. So poor in spirit, you put those together, you have someone who has lacking for power of life. You're lacking power for life. That's the poor in spirit. Now, there's been a lot of debate about whether this should be interpreted literally as if you are economically poor or metaphorically as if you're spiritually poor. But I think it's both. For most of the people that Jesus was speaking to, they were experiencing both kinds of poverty. These people were literally suffering poverty and oppression, but they were also emotionally discouraged, demoralized, and spiritually empty. They had no economic, social, or spiritual resources to draw on. They were oppressed, they were helpless, they were hopeless. And here's the wild turn. Jesus looks at these people, the oppressed, the depressed, the discouraged, the beaten down, and he says to them, "You are the privileged ones. You are the blessed ones. Yours is the kingdom of heaven." How could this be? Does this mean that there's something inherently good about being poor and something inherently bad about being rich? I don't think so. Because Jesus had some wealthy followers, people like Zacchaeus and Nicodemus. So this doesn't mean that you're excluding people who have wealth. But here's what I think this means. I think there's something about being poor, whether that's economically or spiritually, something about feeling powerless, something about being at the end of your rope, something about hitting rock bottom that puts you in a posture where you are ready and willing to receive the grace of God. And here's the truth that I want you to hear from this beatitude. You'll never know that Jesus is all you need until Jesus is all you have. But when Jesus is all you have, then you will realize and you will know that Jesus is all that you need. See, there's a profound freedom that comes when you recognize your complete dependence upon God. And when you have nothing left to hold on to, you discover in those moments that he is more than enough. And when you're in that place, when you have nothing left and you suddenly know in that moment your profound need for God, you recognize that you're helpless and that you need his grace. You become ready to receive help and mercy in a way that those who seem to have their lives fit together might not be. Some of you are familiar with the 12 Steps program like AA or NA or SA or CA that meets here. There's a concept in those communities called rock bottom. It's not a wrestling term, Austin. It's different for everyone. But the idea is this. Rock bottom is the place where you reach before you're truly ready to receive help. Step one of the 12-step program is basically saying we admit that we are powerless over alcohol and that our lives have become unmanageable. We admit we are powerless. Step two of the AA program is we came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. Friends, there is deep spiritual wisdom in those steps. I know that many of you could share stories in this room of hitting rock bottom. Those moments where you felt that the bottom fell out of your life, when the things that you could count on were suddenly gone, and the weight of it all was crushing. Maybe it was a loss of a relationship that you thought would last forever. Maybe it was a financial crisis that has you completely shaken, or it was a health diagnosis that changed everything in an instant. And I can tell you this, that when I look at my own life, and it's those very worst moments, those moments that felt like nightmares, the ones that I would never, ever, ever want to relive again, that I'm in those moments that I most profoundly recognize that, God, I need you. Those times when I couldn't pretend that I had it all together, that all my self-sufficiency was stripped away, and I had nothing to lean on but Jesus. And it's in those times when I came face to face with the reality of my own weakness. And yet that's where, in those moments where I found God meeting me with his strength. And in those moments when you cry out to him for mercy and his help, not with polished, well put together prayers, but with raw, desperate cries from the depths of your heart, in those moments that you know that he is near to the brokenhearted. Not always in the ways that I expected, but in the ways that I never could have imagined or received. Looking back, I can see how God shows up in those moments. He didn't give a quick fix or an easy way out, and sometimes he didn't even give me the answer I was looking for, but he gave me himself. He said, I'll never leave you, forsake you. He's my refuge, a strength, a very present help in trouble, that he carried me through even though I didn't have the strength to take another step. He provided in ways I couldn't explain. He surrounded me with peace in the middle of chaos and comforted me when I felt like all I was seeing was brokenness. And those moments taught me something that I could never would have learned if everything was perfect in my life. Taught me that his grace is sufficient. His power is made perfect in my weakness. And in those moments when I felt like I had nothing, it's in those moments that I realized that Jesus is my everything. And as painful as those moments were, I wouldn't trade them because they showed me really who God was. That he is faithful, that his mercy and his love will sustain even when life is hard. It's only when my hands were empty that I was most ready to receive God's fullness. Because when my hands are full, whether it's with money or power or success or something else, there's no room to receive anything else. When my hands are empty, when you're postured, you're ready, you're open to receive everything that God wants to pour into you. And that's what Jesus is saying here. The kingdom is for those who are empty. It's for those who don't come to him and saying, look at me. It's for those who come to him and say, I have nothing. And they need him to give you everything. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. So how do we apply this to our church community? What does it mean for us to live as people who are poor in spirit? Let me break this down, because Jesus' words isn't just a call for personal reflection. It's an invitation to a way of life, both individually and for us as a community. First thing I want you to see is to receive the comfort of the blessing. Receive the comfort of the blessing. Maybe you're here this morning and you feel like a failure. Maybe you feel like a failure as a parent. You've yelled at your kids too much this week. Or you're carrying guilt over mistakes that you made in raising them. Maybe you feel like a failure in your marriage. Things haven't turned out the way that you've hoped, and you're struggling to even find common ground with your spouse. Or maybe you feel like a failure as a whole. If that's you, this blessing is for you. Maybe you look at your life and it feels unrecognizable to you. Like you're living the story you didn't want to leave. The dreams that you had are gone. The plans that you made for your life have crumbled, and you don't know how you got here. If that's you, this blessing is for you. Maybe you're carrying deep pain in your heart this morning, pain so raw and so heavy that there are days that you don't even know how you're going to make it. If that is you, friend, this blessing is for you. Maybe you feel cast out or pushed aside, like you're on the margins, forgotten and overlooked. This blessing is for you. Maybe you feel lost, like you're wandering through life without direction or clarity, unsure of the purpose of your place in this world. This blessing is for you. Maybe you're living with a health situation or a disability that makes every day a battle, or you're caught in the middle of a grip of an addiction and feel like you've gone way too far to get help. This blessing is for you. Maybe you're struggling with mental illness, depression, anxiety, or an unseen pain that feels like it's pulling you under. This blessing is for you. If you're underemployed and you're wondering how you're going to make it next month, or if you're overemployed and you're working so hard and you're still barely scraping by, this blessing is for you. If you're overemployed and you're burned out with endless demands, exhausted from trying to keep up with expectations, this blessing is for you. Maybe you've gone through a divorce and you've experienced the weight of a broken relationship and it has left you demoralized. Life has beaten you down to the point that hope feels like a distant memory. Friend, this blessing is for you. Maybe you're battling a chronic illness, waking up every day in pain that doesn't go away. This blessing is for you. Maybe you feel like you've been swindled and taken advantage of, hurt by someone you trusted, or betrayed by the systems you thought that would protect you. This blessing is for you. Maybe you feel emotionally starved, longing for love and connection or affirmation, but instead you're stuck in loneliness and you wonder, God, do you care? This blessing is for you. And even if you feel emotionally dead, so dumb and distant that in your heart you have nothing left to give, Jesus says, this blessing is for you. Jesus looks right at you, right where you are, in the middle of your pain, in the middle of your struggle, in the middle of your emptiness. And he says, you are not forgotten. You are not disqualified. You are the fortunate one. Blessed are you, for yours is the kingdom of heaven. Friends, this blessing is not for people who feel like they have it all together. This blessing is for the desperate ones. It's for people who have hit rock bottom. It's for people who feel like and call themselves failures. But here's the good news. God is especially near to the brokenhearted. He saves those who are crushed in spirit. Think about it. The Sermon on the Mount, the most famous, beautiful teaching of Jesus, doesn't start with a command. It doesn't start with a list of rules. It starts with a blessing. It starts with grace. Religion often says, do these things, then you will be blessed, and God will bless you. Jesus says, you are accepted. You are forgiven. You are loved. You are blessed. You are claimed by the Father, not just today, but forever. So if you're in a desperate place, if you're empty, if you're broken, if you're at the end of yourself, Jesus is saying to you, yours is the kingdom of heaven right here in this desperate place. Come with me. Let's learn together how to live the good life, even in the midst of your struggle. Receive the comfort of the blessing. Secondly, here's the challenge of the blessing. The blessing isn't just a comfort, it's also a challenge. Because I think it's important that we hear this challenge, especially when it runs completely counter to both American culture and much of American Christianity. Here's what Jesus is teaching us. The more you have, the more wealth, the security, successes you accumulate, the better your standing is in the world, the harder it becomes for you to live in dependence on God. Why? Because in a culture like ours, we're conditioned to rely on ourselves. American ideology tells us to pull ourselves up by our bootstraps, work harder, be independent, achieve success at all costs. Self-sufficiency is celebrated. Dependence or anything or anyone is often seen as a weakness. And the mindset doesn't stop with just secular culture. It actually creeps into our churches as well. In too many Christian circles, there's this idea that if you're living the good life, you'll be blessed in every area of your life. You're financially secure. You're morally upright. You're free from struggle. You will not suffer. We tell ourselves that if we follow the rules, then God will reward us with a life that looks picture perfect. But here's the thing, Jesus completely flips that script on its head. In Jesus' eyes, it's not about self-sufficiency or the morally together who are blessed. It's the one who know that they have nothing. It's not the people who seem to have figured everything out for their lives who receive the kingdom. It's the people who cry out for mercy because they know their need for Jesus. So what does that mean for us? It means that we let go of the vision of the blessed life that both our culture and even some parts of the Christian church have sold us. And as a church family, We're not called to claim our advantages or our wealth or our successes. We're called to claim our need for Jesus as our greatest asset. And let's be honest, church, that's a hard thing to do. In communities like ours in this room, where middle and upper middle class values of self-sufficiency and performance dominates, it's easy for us to hide behind a facade. It's easy for us to disguise our struggles, to mask our pain, and present ourselves as well together, successful, and righteous. We're really good at pretending, aren't we? But here's the thing, Jesus says that's the path to spiritual ruin. So what if Loft City, we stopped pretending? What if we stopped pretending? What if we as a church, we just decided that we're not going to pretend, that we're better off than we really are? What if we stopped pretending that our marriages are perfect, that our families are put together, that our lives are easier than we show off to other people? Wouldn't that be actually freeing for us? If we could do that, what if we become a community that stands in stark contrast to the American ideals of independence and perfection and image management? We'd be marked by a community by vulnerability and honesty and transparency, where people can come and admit their struggles and find grace and love and support. And as I was preparing this sermon, I was thinking about our church. I was like, I would love for our church to be known as a hospital for the wounded. Not as a fancy church that does things well, not as a wealthy church, not even as a nice church or a diverse church, but as a messy church of people who are real about their need for Jesus. A church where people might say, oh, Loft City, those people don't pretend they have it all together. Man, they love each other. Man, they will go out of their way to pick someone up when they fall. Man, they will make sure that no one feels isolated. And they receive grace together. That'd be beautiful. This kind of community is exactly what Jesus is looking for. Not a church that's built on American ideals of strength and success, but one that reflects the upside-down values of his kingdom. Dependence on Jesus, grace for one another, and the courage to be real. Third point, living the truth of dependence. What does it mean to live the truth of dependence? Rowan Williams, the former Archbishop of Canterbury, says this beatitude is the antidote to the sin of pride. This beatitude is the antidote to the sin of pride. Because pride at its core is our failure to put our dependence on Jesus. Pride says, I can do this on my own. I don't need your help. I don't need God's help. I can do this by myself. And this first beatitude of Jesus confronts pride head on, reminding us that we are not independent. We are not self-sustaining beings. To be poor in spirit means to recognize that every breath that we take is a gift from God. To be poor in spirit is to recognize that every good thing in our lives is from his hand. To be poor in spirit is to be reminded that we are dependent creatures entirely sustained by his grace. And that runs directly against the grains of our culture. Think about it. In America, we celebrate independence, don't we? It's baked into the DNA of our country. We idolize self-sufficiency. We idolize personal achievement. We idolize the ability to stand on our own 2 feet. And from an early age, we are taught that maturity means that you can make it on your own, not relying on anyone else. Independence is the mark of adulthood, strength, and success. And Jesus comes in and he flips that script. He says in his kingdom, to be mature means you recognize your need for one another. Strength comes not from self-sufficiency, but from humility. The life of flourishing that Jesus calls blessed begins with the acknowledgement that we cannot do it on our own. Let's be honest, that's uncomfortable, isn't it? Because even as Christians, we fall into a trap of thinking that we need to fix ourselves up before we can come to God. We feel like we need to get our act together to be more disciplined, to be more spiritual, to be more presentable before we can even show up to Jesus. And that's not the thing that Jesus is asking of us. Think about how children act. They don't have problems asking for help, do they? If they need something, they will let you know. If they're a newborn, they will make sure your ears pop out with their crying till you feed them or change their diaper. They don't overthink it. They don't worry about where they are. They don't think there's appropriate time or inappropriate time. They will just do it, right? My 11-year-old, 11, I thought he'd grow up by now. I could be middle of a Zoom meeting and he'll just walk right in because he doesn't care. And he'll ask for things. I'm like, hold on, let me mute you let me mute my Zoom call so I can talk to you, right? But they will just come in. Can I have a snack? Can you tie my shoes? Can I stay up late? Can I eat this bug? Can I do this? Can I do that? Why? Because children are messy. They're needy. They're completely unfiltered. Why? Because they trust that their parent will receive them with love. And that's the picture that Jesus gives us when he says, blessed are the poor in spirit, because theirs is the kingdom. He's saying, come to me. Don't hide your mess. Don't try to clean up your life. Come to me as you are, broken, overwhelmed, and real, and let me be the one to meet your need. So what would it look like for us to stop hiding our messes and start living in this truth? For some of us in this room, it means that first of all, that we need to let go of our pride. The part of us that says, I'm fine, I don't need help, I can do this on my own. Maybe we've been pretending for so long that we're afraid to admit just how much we're struggling. But the truth is that when we stop hiding and start declaring our dependence, that's actually where real freedom begins. That's the secret to a good life. Letting our needs drive us to the Father. And when we bring him our emptiness, our failures, and our weaknesses, that's where he meets us with his fullness and his grace and his strength. Here's the paradox of the kingdom of Jesus. Dependence doesn't make you weaker, it actually makes you stronger. Declaring your need for God isn't a sign of failure, it's actually a pathway to flourishing. And when you live in the truth of this beatitude, you can stop striving to prove yourself. You can stop performing, you can stop pretending, you can stop trying to even earn God's love or anyone else's approval, because the good news is you already, right now, wherever you are, you have the love of the Father. He already calls you beloved. He already calls you blessed. So what if today, Loft City, we embrace this truth together? What if we stopped running from our need and instead saw it as our greatest gift? What if we stopped pretending to be self-sufficient and instead declared our dependence on Jesus, not as a last resort, but as the foundation of our lives? Friends, that's the invitation of this beatitude. Jesus says, blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. When you come to him empty, he fills you up. When you come to him weak, he makes you strong. When you come to him broken, he restores you. So let's stop hiding. Let's come to him as children, messy, needy, unfiltered. Let's trust that he will meet us with his love. Because, friends, that's where the good life begins. I want to invite you to take a moment to respond to this. I want to invite you, would you close your eyes? Would you just empty everything from your palms? Would you just close your eyes, settle your heart, and be still for a moment? And I want to invite you to take your hands and put it on your, place them in your lap. Take your hands and place them in your lap and clench your fist as tightly as you can. Clench your fist as tightly as you can. You feel the tension in your fingers? Tension in your wrist? Tension in your arms? That's what we live like when we live in self-reliance. Grasping for control, clinging to our own strength, trying to hold everything together by our own might. It's exhausting, isn't it? I invite you to open your hands slowly. Your fingers unfurl, palms up. Feel the release. Feel the openness. This is the posture of the poor in spirit. Empty-handed, not clinging to what we think we need, but ready to receive all that God has for us. Friends, this is the invitation of Jesus. You're not bringing to him what you've achieved or what you've earned or what you built. It's about you coming to him, hands open, and saying, I can't do this on my own. I need you. And here's the amazing thing. Jesus doesn't ask us to come to him with open hands. He meets us in that place of need with the fullness of his grace. The Beatitude says, blessed are the poor in spirit isn't just this abstract concept or a nice idea. It's made possible because of the finished work of the cross. Jesus himself lived this beatitude perfectly. He emptied himself, leaving the riches of heaven to walk among us on earth in humility and dependence on the Father. He became poor so that through his poverty we might become rich. He took the weight of our sin, our shame, and our failure, everything that keeps us clenched up in pride and fear, and he bore it on the cross. And in doing so, he opened the door of the kingdom of heaven for us. He took the punishment we deserve so that we could receive grace that we don't deserve. He died in our place and rose again, declaring once and for all that the work is finished. And because of Jesus, friends, you and I can live with open hands. We can stop grasping for control. We can stop striving to earn God's love. We can simply receive it as a gift that it is. His body was broken. His blood was poured out so that we can live in the freedom of his grace. Friends, that's what we remember when we come to the table week in and week out. The bread and the cup remind us of the lengths that Jesus went through so that we could experience the fullness of God's kingdom right here, right now on this earth. And so as we prepare to take communion together, I want to invite you to sit with Jesus for a moment. Would you let him search your heart? What are you clinging on to? Is it your pride? Is it your self-sufficiency? Is it fear? Is it shame? Can I invite you, before you come to the table this morning, would you release that? Isaac and Lauren are going to lead us in worship. But I invite you, before you come to communion, before you come to the table, take some time to be still before the Lord. Would you let him meet you in this place of need? Whenever you're ready, come and get the elements, the bread, the cup. Take them with you. I'll come up at the end of the song and we'll take communion together. If you need prayer this morning, our prayer team is in the back of the room, ready to pray with you about anything, whether it's something that the Holy Spirit is dealing with you today or something else that you're carrying. They're ready and available to pray with you. Friends, Jesus has done the work. The table is set. Come not because you're worthy, come because he's worthy and he has welcomed you to his table. Come with open hands to receive the grace that God has poured out to you.